series
We'll do
of,
fine.
questions, but why don't we do this? I've read your material, and Jody probably has as well, and I know Commissioner Scar looked at some of it.
I didn't get the packet.
Oh, you didn't? Okay, well,
God.
it's very straightforward, and there are lots of backup material. And in essence, and correct me if I'm wrong, John, is you're not recommending any changes in the portfolio or any other situation that investment policy or other things. But I've got I've got 9 things I'd like to talk about. So I think our time might be better used if we deal with those. And you can give a quick summary of where we are, and I think we're all pretty familiar with the market. It's been doing, notwithstanding that little dip a couple of weeks ago, it's been doing pretty well, and we're achieving new highs. So do you want to comment on that? And then maybe I think it'll be more productive if I go through some of the things that are going to happen over the next couple of months.
Well, you just succinctly covered everything I was going to cover. This is a good news meeting. The capital markets have been strong. The performance and the plan has been appropriate. I wanted to point out that over the course of time, I have trimmed the county back on some growth stock exposure, specifically that mega cap technology stock exposure. That will have the effect of mitigating volatility. And let me share my screen. I'll take less than 45 seconds to wrap this
Sure,
up.
go ahead.
Commissioner, hold on just a moment. This will work. I should be sharing a screen now.
Yeah, I got it on mine. Go ahead. You're good.
I'm going to resize this. I assume that you two are working from fairly large 30-inch monitors, or are you working from
well, no, I have a laptop. I'm actually in Vancouver because I've got some doctor's appointments today, and both my wife and I do. And so, but no, I can see what you're doing there. And this is a county computer, so I'm sure it'll work fine.
Great. So these 6 stocks are now 7 stocks. It's now called the Magnificent Seven. But we can see since the last financial recession that 6 of the 500 stocks in the S&P 500, you could call this the S&P 494, doesn't exist, but it technically is that. You could call this the S&P 6. Nearly all the growth in the stock market over the United States over the last 14 years has come from maybe a double handful, a dozen, 15 dominant technology stocks. They are extremely fully valued. Everyone is afraid to walk away from them and sell them, other than Warren Buffett, who sold half of his position in Apple in that debacle. But we have trimmed some exposure to this sector. If we had done it sooner, it frankly would have been justified, but it would have truncated some of the performance. But we are so late into this cycle that you now have a more balanced portfolio than what most investments have. Let's go take a look at.
By the way, you left NVIDIA off your chart there. I don't see.
NVIDIA and Tesla are now part of the Let's see, Netflix is no longer in it was never called the Magnificent Six. It was originally called FANG, then FAANG. Then as names changed, including Alphabet used to be Facebook. The Magnificent Seven now includes NVIDIA and at the present time, Tesla.
Alphabet's actually Google, isn't it?
I'm so sorry. You're correct. Yeah. Alphabet is Google. Meta is Facebook.
No, I'm following you here. I follow this not quite as closely as you do, but pretty closely. You're right. Your point is well taken. Without those 7, we'd have a much flatter line.
So when we look at the internal construction, 20 seconds and I'll be done. When we look at the internal construction of the stock component of your pension plan, value stocks, which is what Warren Buffett has built his career on, dividend paying, high cash flow stocks, growth stocks, you're heavily overweighted in large cap stocks, the top row, and you're relatively neutrally weighted between value stocks, which Warren Buffett specializes in, and growth stocks, which is where the FANG or the Phantom or the Magnificent Seven hang out. If we were to look at this same diagram for the S&P 500, this quadrant would be over 40. It might be 44%. And this quadrant would be closer to 10%. And so you can see how as asset managers have frankly appropriately chased performance for the last 14 years, the world has become a very undiversified place in order to perform, but we have brought the county's pension plan over the course of time back into more general conformity with balance because we're fairly late in the market cycle. That's the only thing I was going to point out. Would you like to, if you have any questions, I'd be glad to take them, but you mentioned you had 9 things to discuss, which leaves us
well,
about...
I do, and let me get to those. And I'm comfortable with what you're doing, and I'm certainly not going to second guess what you do and how you evaluate it. But so I'm kind of looking at the bigger picture, and we're still headed towards an RFP that I'll have ready. I've been working with Jody. She sent over a lot of material, and I'm planning on getting that on the street in the middle of September, if not earlier, and it'll cycle maybe 30 days out, and we'll see. And I'll look at all 3 of our components. I'll obviously what you do as the investment advisor, and then an actuary, and likely, we may even decide to take an exception and stay with Milliman. Although I may put a question if if they could pick up other things, and then the administrator, which is principal, out of Des Moines, Iowa, and so we'll have them turn in a proposal as well if they want to be the administrator. So that it'll have those 3 parts to it, and what I will ask for, I think, is maybe some monthly reporting, an email if with maybe one attachment against some to be decided indices, meaning that with if you're the one or whomever, we'd settle on some fairly common indices that made sense, like the S&P 500 or the Russell 2000, maybe the Russell 1000. I think you referenced that in your report. Something where we just kind of track the total portfolio against that. And then, but more importantly, where we're headed, and Jody can help me with this, as you know, we're going to switch over to PERS as of January 1 for new hires. Mm-hmm. And incidentally, we've hired over 50 people this year. It might be closer to 60 now. Jody could correct me. And I think there's another 20 some in process. So we will have replaced 1/3 of the county's workforce just this calendar year. And that's pretty significant in terms of cash flow that's going into the investment portfolio, because what I'll be asking as we go down is what is the net return, net of all withdrawals and additions? And of course, the addition side of it will change. And so where I have a concern, and Jody helped me out here, we're not, after we switch over to PERS, all the new money that would come in from new employees, regardless of when it actually starts, when they're actually in a chair or when we have it budgeted like we do now, there won't be any cash going in. So we'll be continue to invest what's in there and move it around as necessary, and then we'll continue to withdraw as people retire. So we'll have a somewhat shrinking pool of money, and so we want to track that. But is it possible, and Jody step right in here, to net it out? In other words, the money coming in, subtract that, the money going out, subtract that, and then the remaining portfolio, how does that measure against these yet to be determined an index that we can all agree is representative, maybe more than one?
So
go ahead, Jody.
John, can I let Doug know? Milliman is working on an actuarial study to project what that looks like from a actuarial place. I'd love to hear John's response on the investments and what strategies might change as our plan shifts. We will have active employee contributions that are currently grandfathered in this plan until they sunset out. And John, the other little contract or plan problem is we have a plan document that says if an employee leaves and isn't vested, that money gets fully refunded to the employee with those guaranteed earnings. And so, even our vesting hedge doesn't help us here. So from an investment place though, I'd love to see, what might look different. I think that was what Doug was asking.
Yeah, it's the the cash flow aspects of all this, and the net monies are going to change pretty drastically, and it's going to even be more significant over time as after July or January 1. And so we want to monitor that more closely than we've been doing, because I can see a point where if we had a down market, let's say of 15% and no cash coming in, we may find an unfunded liability that is much wider than anybody would like. And then the question will be, what does the county do about it? Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying. I've just been quiet, waiting for you to kind of lay out your thoughts.
Well, that's part of it. So go ahead and respond to that.
My experience has been very different than what I understood you to say, despite the fact that you're setting up a new plan under PERS. And yes, of course, you will begin funding that for the 50 new employees and all future new hires. My experience has been you're going to have very substantial contributions yet to be made to the frozen plan, and that these plan assets, they will continue to perform in the market either up or down. You will have major employer contributions that continue for decades for existing employees. Those employees that were hired last year will be under this plan until they either terminate their employment and leave or sunset out in retirement, and then all the way through retirement. From your new hires a year ago, not this year, not as soon as PERS kicked in, but prior to PERS kicking in, you're going to have, in some cases, 50 years of future liabilities, both in terms of employer contributions and then a long career, and then hopefully, for the employee's sake, a long retirement. While this plan assets will shrink over time, and it will shrink in view of the material that Milliman has provided you and us for years, your plan should experience significant shrinkage in assets over the next 15 years, because your plan is heavily weighted toward older employees with a significant number of retirements. As retirements occur, they will move into in-pay status. You'll still be obligated to make contributions in order to fund those liabilities, but at least the liability stream will stop growing. And that's really what's going to take place. When I look at City of Forest Grove is the best comparable. They froze their plan maybe in 2016 and did the same thing that you did, possibly in 2012 or 2014. And, they make significant contributions to PERS now, but they still continue to make significant contributions to their existing plan.
Understand. It doesn't go away.
So that'll be interesting to see, but I don't expect material changes to any significant aspect of the assets in the old plan, the liabilities of the old plan, the funding for the old plan. You're just going to have this shift, the future growth in all those liabilities to PERS. And in 10 years, it'll be a material thing. In the beginning, it will be a smaller material thing. Now, talking about indexing, the plan is already indexed at 2 levels. It's indexed fund by fund by fund, and I'll just show that to you briefly. Every individual fund has its best fit index assigned to it, and we've been tracking it for years. And that's really important to the work that we do, and it's tangentially important to the work that we invite you into from a supervisory standpoint. And then you already have performance that's calculated net of all fees and cash flows, and that's been available since I'd have to think about it, but maybe 2015, and it's always been expressed on this page, and it shows the total portfolio return over various periods of time. And these are net of all inflows, all outflows. So
okay, well, I might have missed that part. I did see that, and I was thinking that was including the disbursements as well as income.
No, the SEC won't permit that.
Okay, got it.
Everything has to be neutralized, so that when you look at these percentages, they are percent returns that have been impacted by the timing of cash flows. Like if there's a major market crash, there was in 2008, stocks dropped 55%. If an employer had made, let's make up something silly but large, if an employer had made $10 million in contribution that year, and they contributed the $10 million before the 50% drop as opposed to the after the 50% drop, the timing of the impact of that cash flow would have a material impact upon performance. That's automatically included in all these calculations. So this is exactly what the regulators want the owner of the account, the fiduciary of the account to see. It's also netted of our costs. It's netted of Milliman's costs. It's netted of principals. They're not the administrator. They're the custodian. It's netted of the custodian cost. If you happen to be, if you happen to be running legal against this, it's also, which is, I don't know if it is or isn't. It's also a net of legal costs, so that it's got all the frictional cost associated with running the pension plan in these performance numbers. Now, more recently, we have assigned a different custom benchmark index, and indexing is a big deal. For example, it would be more normal not to index the total plan, although it's done, and we do it, and that's what this expresses. It's somewhat more interesting to separately, in addition to the total plan, index the equity sleeve and then index the fixed income sleeve. So you have the two main components as well as the total plan. The index has to fit your portfolio. So your portfolio has 23 investment options. Some have heavier allocations, some have lighter allocations. And if we use an index, you've mentioned this several times over a number of conversations, Doug. If we use the S&P 500 index to benchmark your performance, then by gosh, I'm going to eliminate all the investment managers that don't look like the S&P 500, and will make the pension look exactly like the S&P 500. So we're actually measuring apples to apples, which in truth is why no one would use the S&P 500 alone. They might use it in small part, but they wouldn't use it alone. Somebody like PERS takes a rather simplified approach. They use let's go look for it. They use I'm so sorry. I wasn't expecting this question, or I would have read ahead and had my page numbers ready. Well, I'll just say they use the Morgan Stanley Capital International All Country World Index to benchmark their equity sleeve, which is the total stock market of the world. And then they build their investment portfolio to mimic that index. Because if they don't, it's like comparing a dump truck to a Formula 500 car. You go, how do we benchmark a dump truck, which we really need to haul this rock, against a Formula 500 car? There's no comparable. So
no, PERS, I got that. That does make sense, and you're quite right. It's you can't lump it all into one box. I get that.
So we have a custom benchmark that is fit to the, well, it was fit to the historical asset structure. I'm going to have to look at it in light of changes made a little while ago to the portfolio. And the changes we don't have discretion, at least not currently. And the changes are always made in combination with involving the fiduciary committee of the county historically. But the benchmark index has to be fit to the plan assets. Now, to the extent that you use you've talked about this at a prior meeting, a discretionary investment manager, which you don't have currently, which would be unusual for a pension plan in our experience. But to the extent that you do that to offload some of the burden that the county would otherwise face, your job then changes at the county to writing one heck of a good investment policy statement, because whatever is in the investment policy statement is how the investment manager is going to build the portfolio. And it's, frankly, it's a pretty big duty to write the IPS. Your current IPS was written very differently. It was written in contemplation of there is no investment fiduciary. Retirement Consulting Group doesn't have discretion. The county commissioners have discretion. And so consequently, the current investment policy is written very broadly, because if you write a narrow investment policy for the commissioners, now the commissioners are hemmed in, and every time they make a committee change, they have to change the investment policy. But if you're going to transfer the responsibility to a discretionary fiduciary investment manager like us or someone else if you terminate us, then you're going to want to write a much more narrow investment policy than what you have today. And you're going to want the county commissioners, your job then shifts to managing the investment policy so the investment manager can run the plan according to your investment policy. It's no different than blueprints. If you said this $130 million liability, $100 million pool of assets, if you said we're going to go spend $130 million on a building and we've got $100 million worth of equity to finance it and the rest is just a liability, and you were going to build this large building, you wouldn't hire a general contractor and subs without a set of blueprints.
No, I agree with that, and that's a pretty good analogy. And I don't think any of us are thinking of, nor are we qualified to rewrite or change the investment policy as it sits. That may happen after we go through this process, but it will be with considerable outside help, I would think. I don't, Jody, what you want to weigh in on that one? I think we've talked about that a little bit.
Well, I do believe just as I call it right size our plan or bring it current with modern practices, we should revisit that investment policy statement. It is dated. Generally, you look at it every couple of years, if not yearly, to make sure it's still appropriate for what's happening in the market. So along with that plan document, making sure we have a governance document, it should be at least reviewed, whether it's rewritten or edited or just reviewed and said, reviewed by, the governing bodies on X date. It just shows fiduciary best practice.
I agree with Jody, but it is a function of how much time the county commissioners are willing to put into it or your investment committee.
I would say that will be relatively minimal, even after I'm off the commission and others, because we're all spread pretty thin. And like today's a pretty good example. We all thought we would sit and visit here and catch up on this sort of thing. And two things came rolling down the road that all of a sudden reset all our priorities. Fortunately, there's three of us, so we can spread around, but maybe that's not the best way to manage much of anything, is by crisis rather than deliberately. But it is what it is.
I'll tell you this, Doug. All of our historical work over the last 35 years for pension plans, the fiduciary committee meets at least on a quarterly basis, anywhere from 1 to 3 hours of duration. We can accomplish a performance review in 30 minutes or in an hour. But in order to equip the county properly, unless you hire a discretionary investment fiduciary, you're going to have a major time commitment in order to be able to be an appropriately nimble investment decision-making body. The more effort you put into process, like investment policy statements, which we do, where it's appropriate and where there's time, the more time that you're going to invest. So you do have a collision of some ideas going on in terms of the reality. I've heard commissioners forever comment on how busy they are, and I believe them. But the more process you have, the more time you need to spend as a decision-making body. Anyway.
And I would agree with that as a general statement. And I would say, I think our board and probably future boards as well are really not going to be in favor of second guessing, analyzing, and spending a great deal of time. They will want something that is self-managing, so to speak, with periodic check-ins. And as long as what is happening, irrespective of the market moves itself, is within those parameters, and they're probably going to be a hands-off approach. But that's just my guess at this point in time, and who knows where future boards will go.
Well, and the only legal part I want to just throw in there is, for the County Board of Commissioners saying they're busy and don't have time is why they haven't been reviewing our documents on a periodic basis. If there's findings that there was, any kind of mismanagement or fiduciary failure, that's not going to be a very good defense. So when we look at those 4 quarterly meetings, there should be an annual review of those docs. And that's, even if it's 15 minutes of saying, hey, we checked the laws, we checked, any changes in the laws, we've checked the market, and this is what we either recommend or don't. It shouldn't be a heavy labor to review those documents on an annual or a semi-annual basis.
So I agree with what Jody has said. Let me interject something I think is important. I spent 25 years serving not Tillamook County, but the employees of Tillamook County, and probably 35 years serving, a little over 35 years serving pension plans of all sizes all over. We're right now tripping over the nickels and dimes, and we're missing the dollars. We're missing the millions of dollars. And the millions of dollars that I'm talking about is at present, you've got $100 million in assets, $125 or $30 million in liability. And what I'm terribly concerned about over the next 10 or 15 years is that the only reason that you have $100 million in assets is because the stock market, this is the S&P composite. So it's 3 different S&P indexes. Beg your pardon. The time frame goes back 150 years. The red line is a regression line, or the average trend. The author of the chart created a derivative calculation that measures the percent variance of the market at any month end, above or below trend. We're not here, we're here. And when we look at where are the assets of Tillamook County today, the answer is they are more optimistically valued in the equity market than in any point in history over the last 150 years. And that's why we think we have $100 million worth of assets. And as long as the government can continue to roll massive stimulus programs, I think we can stay up here in the clouds. But I do expect over the next 5 to 10 to 15 years to see that gap between liabilities and assets to grow materially from 25 or 30 million dollars to, it could easily hit 40 million or 45 million. And perhaps I'm being optimistic even when I say that. Where these things are really important, and they also need to be done in the way that Jody is prescribing. She introduced herself to me a year ago as a change agent. I knew all this was coming. This is what Jody does. She's good at what she does, but this is what I do, and I may not be around in the future. You may have a completely different plan. So what I'm trying to do for the employees is say, it's fine to work on the small and the very important things in procedural prudence. But what we need to be focusing on is how do we close that gap? And there's only 2 ways to do it. We do it in the capital markets through performance and dodging risk when risk presents, or we do it through employer funding, lots and lots of employer funding. Or both, and you're not a corporation with excess profit. I'm assuming you never have excess budget. You don't get to the end of the year and say, oh, look, there's another $30 million. We had a good year this year. What are we going to do? We're going to put some in the pension plan. So
that's sort of by default, that's what's been happening when I think decisions were made, or maybe decisions weren't made to start paying in when we didn't even have a body in a chair. And that did buy down the unfunded liability a little bit. I'm not sure it was all that significant, but it probably had some impact.
Every little bit helps. I'm a cheerleader for that. So that's number one. Like, what are we missing? Where's the elephant in the room that we're not seeing? That's number one. Number two, the county has missed the opportunity let's put it this way. PERS since the 1980s has materially redesigned PERS, 4 different generations of PERS. And Tillamook County hasn't redesigned its document once. And that has caused liabilities to be much greater than what they should have been had historical county commissioners been focused on what is the evolution in plan design.
Well, you are absolutely right.
Those two things are what matters.
And you're right on with that, and that's part of why we're having this conversation and why we're going to publish an RFP and make some other changes. The first change was PERS, and that was made, I don't know, I guess a year or more ago to head in that direction. The second and backup, and we haven't talked about this, any of us on this call, but we have talked about it internally a little bit. As a fallback position, we can restructure the plan, and you do that at our peril, meaning some employees might leave, others would be severely disadvantaged. There might even be legal issues. But I think that can be done, as PERS has done, like you said, a number of times. And the worst case, right now, we're looking over the next 4 years at a 20 million shortfall in the general fund, given the current trends and what's on the books. And that's a fairly substantial amount of money. That's roughly 18% or so of our revenue not catching up. And so as we roll forward, that may be one of the options. I can tell you just quickly what we're looking at now. To close that gap on the budget side of it, we're looking at going to a 4-day week. We're looking at going to a 6-hour day. We're looking at spinning off part of the sheriff's office and getting an enhanced sheriff patrol district, which we tried twice. We may also look at other fairly drastic options of some kind of a separate operating levy on the income side. And then on the flip side, the expense side, one of it is to restructure the retirement system. We spend more on retirement than we do on medical and health, and I have never seen an organization that spends more on retirement than they do on medical and health and other pretty standard benefits. It's far and away the largest fringe benefit we offer. And you know all this, but I'm just telling you, we are aware of that, and something's going to have to give here pretty quick.
Thank you for mentioning that. Now, let me focus on 2 more points, or maybe 3 points. They're very brief, that are important.
I need to leave in about 6 or 8 minutes, so if we can, and we can do this again in a few weeks if you like, if we're not done. But go ahead.
Yeah, I'm always happy to chat. That's the nature of my job. The things that are not going to move the needle for your county for the future are largely who you hire for an investment advisor. If you want a different investment advisor, go get a different investment advisor. Then an RFP is the appropriate way to do it. But whether you hire us or whether you hire Joe Blow firm to be the investment advisor, who builds your 60-40 portfolio or your 65-35 portfolio, and who allocates the assets? Once again, that's a nickels and dime versus a tens of millions of dollars question. If you're happier using somebody else, use somebody else. But it's not where the county is going to find success or failure, unless, look at what I'm circling. If you through your RFP process focus on the normal things, you're going to miss this market relationship. And my experience has been most investment advisors aren't very tactical about where we are in the market. And if you're on the wrong side of this inversion in asset prices that is coming, if we had the time, we could look at the work for JP Morgan, State Street Global Advisors, BlackRock, Fidelity, Vanguard. All of them project forward very poor long-term capital market returns. And if your investment advisor misses this and structures this incorrectly, they have to be brave. They have to do something that's different. They can't just track the MSCI All Country World Index or a different index. They're going to have to do something different in order not to be severely hampered by this. The whole idea that you see here is excesses revert not just to the mean, but through the mean. Mm-hmm. We're living in an environment of excessive federal stimulus, both through Congress and through boy, I'm having a senior moment, and through the Federal Reserve as well as the U.S. Treasury. And as long as we can run endless amounts of debt, which no one really believes that we can in my world, then we can keep these asset prices up there. But someday when we hit the wall, we have to be the fiduciary committee that is really attuned to making those changes. And if you run a standard RFP, I've run a lot of RFPs, a lot more than you have. And if you run a standard RFP, you better be focusing your selection decision around the people that are the most coherent concerning these facts that I'm presenting.
I do not disagree at all. I think, and we could sit and talk about how the government manages its money and federal fiscal policy and the Fed and their role and all of that, until we all get sleepy and take the afternoon off. But so I hear you on that, and I think you're quite right, and that's why I don't think anybody in Tillamook County would want to or is qualified to really get into that. Our fiduciary, at least in my experience or judgment, is we hire someone like you or others and say, okay, here's what we want. We want to be kept abreast. And if things change or something goes wrong or you can't measure up, then that's a problem that reflects back to us. And we have to deal with it. And so I don't question anything you said. I think it's absolutely right on. And, I don't have the expertise you do, but I read the Wall Street Journal for the last 50 years every day and had a lot of economics in college and all of that. And I think you're absolutely on with the federal, what the federal government is doing now and the deficit spending, and this gap is there. And, maybe someday it'll all come home to roost. Maybe it won't, I don't know. And maybe some of us won't live long enough to have it matter. Right. But I have children and grandchildren, and I'd sort of like them to be able to have a banking system where, where it works, all those kinds of things. But that's another conversation for another day. So let me ask one other, just kind of an administrative question, then I've got to bug out here. The work that Principal is doing now, do you see any issues with that at all? Are they doing what they're supposed to do? Is the relationship okay? I'm just kind of a check-in on that.
They're the largest provider of pension services in the United States to corporations. Nobody is the largest provider of pension services in the United States to public entities other than Milliman, because that marketplace is so small compared to corporations. Generally, as a custodian, they do a very serviceable job. Do I like your relationship manager? No, I dislike her greatly. She's made significant errors for other clients. I have some real concerns. I wouldn't have an objection at all to changing the custodian. Historically, you were with U.S. Bank. U.S. Bank went through, as all custodians do, went through a period where they weren't really the sharpest tool in the shed. But you need not just so much a custodian, you need a very solid benefit payment processing agent, because I promise you, if you screw up those monthly checks to your employees, somebody in HR is going to hear about it times however many retires you have, 150, and it will make for a very unpleasant month. So it's the marriage of custody plus benefit payment processing. They're okay. They mostly don't screw up, but when they screw up really big. And we just discovered what we consider to be a very significant liability in one of their contracts that they have with at least one of our customers. So we assume they have them with all of our customers, and that's on the table to be discussed with everyone.
Okay, fair enough.
Doug, we also have some customer service issues where Mary Jo does all of the address updates and everything because they're not responsive to our retirees.
And we've talked about that a little bit as well. And so we're very much aware of that. And that will be part of the RFP too. Do we stay with them or look at others, or, just review that part of the whole program? And, we'll take it from there, and, we may get it right. We may not. We may have to make changes down the line. Part of what has troubled me coming onto this fairly new is I don't think this has been really examined thoroughly for quite some time until Jody arrived, and then I came in behind her. And so the two of us, I think, have probably opened some doors that haven't been open for quite some time.
In an earlier communication in the last couple of months, as I mentioned, when I first served the county many years ago, commissioners didn't even come to the meetings.
Yeah, well, two of them didn't come today. So,
well, they didn't come for years. It was just culturally where they were. So, it's been a process of evolution, but I think it reflects there's always a lot of county business and not enough commissioner hands. Each one of you needs an extra 10 hours in the day to get your jobs accomplished.
Well, and that's our form of government. We're not home rule with a county administrator. We serve, the three of us serve as both administrators and policy people. And, and that's the way it is, the majority of Oregon and a good share across America. And it is what it is. So you do the best you can and try to get, a few hours of sleep every night. That's about how it works. And
sure.
And on the other hand, the sun comes up every morning, the tide comes in twice a day, and could be worse.
Right. In closing, I have all the time that you need this morning, but I know you need to go. In closing, Doug, you said that you had 9 things, and I'm not sure that we discussed them all.
We've covered them. The last one there was to talk about principle a little bit, and I'm not going to talk about Millman because they do what they do. We mentioned investment policy, and the others were more. I think we've weaved them into the conversation and where we're headed. So, if you don't mind, I may maybe Jody and I would have a second meeting with you, maybe just the three of us at some point, and bounce a few questions off you before we take this any further down the road. But
can I get that set up?
I'm comfortable, and I can tell the other commissioners that the recommendations you put forward, that we don't change much in the portfolio, we don't change much of anything. We're riding the market, and it's up and down like it always is, and we're in reasonably good shape. But we also see some issues ahead of us, not the least of which is the federal situation and the switch over to PERS, which is really kind of a big deal. Because it's a significant change, and then whatever else. So I'm okay with all that now, unless you see something, Jody, that we need to deal with right immediately.
No, I think just checking back in with John and making sure as we move through this process, we're all communicating, because there's major, there's a number of vendors involved in this process, and they all have to move in succinct order, like making sure that Millman and the custodian and John is aware of all of the plan changes that are occurring. It's just helpful to keep everyone on the same page.
Yeah. Thank you, Jody.
Okay. Well, I need to head out, and so maybe let's just keep the door open, and maybe we'll have this conversation again right about the time or while we're preparing the final documents on the RFP, and make sure we've covered a few things, or what have we not covered, those sorts of things, if that's okay with you, John.
That'd be fine. Do you want my team to reach out in the next couple of weeks and try to get something scheduled for the three of us?
Let me do it from this end, because I'm not sure, what's going to happen. And we've got 2 or 3 other major things. I'm trying to talk the voters into coughing up $24 million for a new radio system, and that's taken a little more time than I'd contemplated, but it is what it is.
Right. Understood. Jody, I'd appreciate a few minutes of your time. Do you think you can spare it this morning?
If I can circle back with you about 11, I do have to run off to another meeting, but I do have time at 11 if you're free.
That'd be, I think, hold on just a quick sec. Yeah, absolutely. That'd be great.
Okay.
Do you just want me to call you?
Call me.
Okay. And I will give the other 2 commissioners that we're everything is rolling forward, no significant changes. We're riding the market. We have certain issues before us, but there's absolutely nothing to lose some sleep over right now. And so
not at all.
More to come. So thank you, John, for your time, and I'll say good morning to all of you, and we'll be in touch.
Doug, as you're off, Teamsters did agree to the PERS change.
Oh, wonderful.
So we're all moving forward on that next step.
Good. I'm going to go fishing this weekend, and maybe I won't worry about that one. That's one more thing.
Don't take that one off your list. Take care.
All right. Thank you, Jody. Bye.